We're good?
Yes, we are.
Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life. Girl, you know it's true. That came from Milli Vanilli. This is Breakfast in Bed here on Smooth 98.1. My name is Oluwaseun. Time check, 3 minutes past 3 o'clock. Not 3 o'clock. And we are in the soul food segment. I have told you earlier that the topic of conversation this lovely morning is grief and its complications. And better still, how do we manage it? How do we go about offering maybe help to somebody who is grieving, or better still, some things that you should not even tell a person who is grieving? And then how do you prevent it from escalating into suicide ideation? To join me discuss very much that topic is a psychotherapist. He's the founder of Elite Life Management Consulting. He's not a fresher to this show. I've had him once, and then we talked about the stress of Lagos life. But then joining me all the way from Abuja via Zoom this morning is Folajaiye Kareem. Good morning.
Good morning. It's a
How
pleasure
are
to be
you?
here again.
It's an absolute pleasure for me.
I'm
Thank
very
you
well,
for,
thanks.
allowing me shift your calendar and all of that. All right. So quickly, because we do not have so much time, let's start with the definition of grief. Now, grief, we know it's a word. We can easily go into the dictionary and check for the meaning. But then from a psychology point of view, the psychotherapist or the psychiatry point of view, how do you define grief? Can you hear me?
Well,
Okay.
yes, I can hear you. I would say that grief doesn't have a specific definition.
Mm.
Usually, when we talk about any form of condition in mental health or as a psychologist, we would usually uh, define or give meaning to some of these terms based on the symptoms or the expressions that we see. And so for grief itself, it can be any form of emotional, physical, cognitive, or psychological response to loss. So when all of these factors come into play, you would say that a person is experiencing a response or a reaction because of loss. And that response is what we call grief.
Okay. Does it have physical symptoms?
Oh, sure. Like I said, it's physical, emotional, cognitive, psychological response. Of course, definitely when the first physical symptom that you would notice when someone is experiencing grief is that this person would normally cry, would be very, very down. Physically, you see their face, their mood as being depressed. So they have what we call depressed mood at the time. Anyone who is going through grief would feel some sense of helplessness. They might begin to experience even bodily symptoms. They may be having a lot of headaches, a lot of physical symptoms on the face, particularly. That's how you can tell that their mood is off or is not. It is in congruence with the way they feel, because you would notice that their eyes are down. You would notice that they are usually not even showing expressions, positive facial expressions. So these are some of the physical symptoms that you would notice. But then when things begin to escalate, so let's say this person has been grieving for months, and then because they've not been grieving properly, they forget to eat, they forget to take care of themselves, they forget to um, engage in healthy habits. It can now lead to complicated physical symptoms. So they can begin to develop things like ulcer, develop heart palpitations, develop anything that can just mess up with their physical health. And so that's why it's really important that when a person is grieving, that we try to encourage them to keep maintaining healthy lifestyle as much as possible.
Thank you. While you were explaining that, you said something very profound. You said grieving properly. Are there healthy ways to grieve? Because the truth is, we've had many hot takes on this topic of grieving. How do you tell a person to grieve? Because it is very relative. What each person is dealing with is different. Their thought process is different. Their belief system is different, because we understand those are some of the things that affect grieving. So are there healthy ways to grieve? And if yes, what are the healthy ways to grieve?
Okay, so the truth is, first and foremost, let me just say that everybody grieves differently.
Mm-hmm.
But what will constitute healthy grieving? So yes, there are healthy ways to grieve. Now, what will constitute healthy grieving would be anything that will not further affect or damage your physical, mental, social relationships. Your physical health, your mental health, and your social relationships. Is very, very, very important that grieving is done in such a way that it doesn't complicate the grief or doesn't extend to further symptoms of any other health condition. And so what will constitute proper grieving would be if a person can deal with the grieving process within the duration of the phases of grief. So we have what we call phases of grief. Okay. So if they are able to do with it within a specific time frame, and the specific time frame usually is between around, say, 6 weeks to 2 months.
Of losing and that then thing.
It is expected, yes, and it's expected that, as they cross the 2-month bar, they are beginning to adjust back to the reality of the loss. However, it will become an unhealthy grief or an improper grief if that person has been grieving for that particular situation for over 2 years, the same way they have been when the loss just happened. Because we know that with time, the grieving subsides, and then people begin to adjust to the reality of the loss, and then they begin to live their normal, healthy life, understanding that the loss has happened and adjusting to the reality of it.
I think you mentioned while you were explaining that there are stages of grief, right? Can you shed more light on that? Or the phases of grief? Yeah.
Okay, yes. Of course, yes. So there are phases of grief or stages depending on how you see it. While there are so many theories that a lot of people, psychologists in particular, have propounded, this one has stayed for a long time. It's by a psychologist called Kubler-Ross. She says that there are 5 stages of grief. The first is called, we use a mnemonic called DABDA, D-A-B-A-D, as DA rather, as a way to remember it. So the first stage of grief is called denial, when an individual experiences the loss of a friend, a loved one, or somebody who is really important to them. They experience denial first. They can't believe that it has happened. So there's this form of shock. We don't know what's going on. How did this happen? And then the next stage is, after it's done that indeed this person has passed, or we are experiencing a loss for real, anger sets in. So in this angry phase, This person is angry with life, angry with the situation, angry with how the person died, angry with how the entire situation of life at the time. And then it moves to the phase of bargaining. So in the bargaining phase, this person is already overcoming the anger and almost adjusting to the reality of the loss. And when the person begins to bargain, this is the period where if you have experienced, anyone listening, if you have experienced the loss of a loved one, you will remember that there was a time where you were questioning everything or trying to appeal. For those who have some form of faith, they would begin to bargain and say, God, take my own life. Why didn't you take my own life and instead of this person? Or is it possible that you can bring this person back, and so that I can go? So this bargaining phase happens, and when it now dawns on the individual that this bargaining is not working, then depression sets in. So there's usually a phase of depression. Now, when there is improper grief, this phase of depression might take a whole long while. And that's when we begin to get worried for the person who is grieving. And this depression phase, usually, if it's in a healthy or a normal grief, would last for a couple of periods, maybe for a few weeks or for a few days, before the person now finally accepts. So the last stage is acceptance. So we've had denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance.
Thank you very much. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be shedding more light actually on that depression, because we understand that if not properly managed from your explanation, it can lead to worse things. And that's one of the reasons we're talking about the complications of grief. And then we take practical steps, how to help people who are grieving, what to say, what not to say, the help generally that you can offer to them. This is Breakfast in Bed here on Smooth 98.1.
Everyone is covering the support. Stay tuned to Smooth 98.1. Love music, love life.
Our time is running really fast today.
What does future forward banking mean to you?
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah. We have about
or just
20. Did I say 20? We don't even have up to that anymore.
We thought you might like all of that.
So from 45 minutes, the show is now 30 minutes. So we have to maximize
to take care of your daily experiences at Providence Bank. We believe that banking should be all about you and your business and how to get you to the next level. If you do not already have a Providence Bank account, please speak with our business concierge on 0700 77 684 387 or email businessconcierge@providencebank.com to switch to a future forward banking experience. Providence Bank. Future forward banking.
This is the Genie.
Are we coming back soon?
And classic. Join me, Unlocking Soul, every Saturday between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. on the Definition of Music and Love Live. Smooth 98.1. Unlocking Soul. Saturday evenings from 5 p.m.
Smooth 98.1, love music, love life. Yes, you heard it. You can catch the Genie Saturday, today's Saturday. That's 5 p.m. And then you get to listen to all the really rich sounds here on Smooth 98.1. But for now, you're tuned into Breakfast in Bed here on Smooth 98.1. My name is Oluwaseun. The topic of conversation is grief, complication, and its management. And my guest is Folajaiye Kareem. He is the founder of Elite Life Management Consulting. He's a clinical psychologist / psychotherapist, and I am very happy to be having this conversation with him today, even though the topic is not exactly exciting. So let's go back to it. While you were explaining, I did say that I want us to drill further into depression and grief. The kind of grief, or rather the kind of depression that comes from grief, just shed more light on it, because I know that we do have, that's a topic for another conversation. We do have depression on its own. Different things can necessitate it. But then let's talk a bit about the kind of depression that comes as a result of grief, and maybe if it has any characteristic display or symptoms or signs or anything that just presents with it.
All right, thank you very much. It's really important that we center on that, because these are the things that precipitates dysfunctional behavior when a person is experiencing prolonged depression while they are mourning. So usually you would begin to experience a lot of things. So some people, particularly in a peculiar case of grief, when they're experiencing depression in the grieving process, you discover that they begin to display behaviors like excessively avoiding anything that has to remind you of the person who you are mourning, begin to engage in dysfunctional behavior like not entertaining social relationships, withdrawing from people, in thinking unhealthy thoughts, unhelpful thoughts rather. So it might also mess up with the way they view their viewpoint of life. So the viewpoint of life for some people now becomes a lot as if life is a hopeless, helpless place. Some people begin to question the meaning of life. So these are the things that would happen normally when the person is having prolonged grief or complicated grief and is in that stage, fixated in the stage of depression, when they are in the stage of grieving. So something very important is the symptoms. Most of the symptoms of depression, of major depressive disorder, might even present at that time. So things like losing pleasure in the things that they would normally have pleasure doing. But in this case, particularly if this person was an intimate partner, this person would lose pleasure, will feel like a part of them is missing because they cannot do the same things that they used to do with their intimate partner again. And so it's different, or it's difficult for them to adjust to learning a new way of life. So one of the things that we do in therapy for people, in grief therapy for people who are experiencing complicated grief, is to help them channel their behaviors towards new activities or habits that are independent of what they used to do with their partners or with the people that have passed, their loved ones. So it's very, very important. However, if a person who is grieving and hasn't come out of that phase of depression, might actually begin to have suicidal thoughts. And it's really important that we handle that, because when that becomes a thing in the process, then we have to make sure that that is handled first before we take care of other things.
All right. Since you already touched on complicated grief, we're talking about types of grief. But before we dive further into the complicated grief, which will take us to the complications, there is a particular one which I feel may contribute, correct me if I'm wrong, may contribute to the depression phase of grief, and that is disenfranchised grief. People who are going through, they are grieving. They're going through a phase where they're grieving, but they are not allowed, in quotes, to mourn or to grieve the person. Say maybe a situation where it is considered not normal, or the person is stigmatized, or it is considered unacceptable or improper. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that does complicate the situation, right? It contributes to increasing the depression phase of grief.
Thanks for bringing that to the fore. Yes, the attitude of those who are around a person who is grieving also has a way of complicating the grieving process, particularly in some cultures or within some family setting or some personality type. They just make you feel like it's not proper for you to mourn this person in a certain way. And, so some people might now begin to hold you back from doing what you need to do, because it's a natural response. It's natural. There's nothing you are trying to fake or you're trying to hide. I remember when I experienced the loss of a loved one. This person happened to be my supervisor, the person who nurtured me in my course to being a clinical psychologist. And I couldn't process it. I couldn't understand, because we had a lot of plans together on what we needed to do or what we wanted to do. And so we developed a kind of bond that was like a mother and child bond. So when the news broke, I didn't know how to react. It was difficult for me to want to plan anything associated with how the funeral process. That was how difficult it was for me at the time. It was also difficult for me to write a what do they call it now? This thing that you write when
tribute.
When you're trying to eulogize someone who has passed.
Yeah,
a tribute. Yes, it was difficult for me to write a tribute because it was just bringing back a lot of memories. So yes, if people met me in that stage and were saying that, and they begin to start telling me, why am I being this way? I'm being selfish with my feelings. I'm not doing that. It further complicates my own way of grieving. And that's why it's easier for you to just allow a person react naturally to what's going on and encourage rather than force them to do certain things. You encourage them, you motivate them to think healthier thoughts, live a healthier lifestyle, and with all of that, they can overcome the grieving process naturally as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think we also need to understand each person's uniqueness and their belief system, because I feel that also plays a major role. Some people do not see death as a loss. It depends on the kind of situation. I mean, there is the anticipatory grief, right? Where people are already grieving before the person goes or before that thing leaves them. And they probably saw it coming. And maybe it reduces how they go through the grieving process. But either ways, whenever you're trying to be kind to somebody who's grieving, you just need to put into consideration a lot of things. And sometimes I feel personally that if you go to visit a person who's grieving, if you do not know what to say, just keep quiet. Instead of you trying to say something and you end up messing things up, just keep quiet. Anyways, let's go back to that complicated grief and how
the shorter, the better.
Yes, exactly. All right, so back to complicated grief, and then how do you help a person wade through that situation such that it does not lead to suicide ideation?
Okay. So this is really important. It's a topic that is dear to my heart, particularly because of the period of time we find ourselves in. The month of September is regarded as the World Suicide Prevention Month.
Yeah.
On the 10th of September, I think we celebrate that day as World Suicide Prevention Day. And when a person is going through grief and might begin to experience suicidal ideation, and some people might actually desire to take their life or attempt to do it, it's important that we do not shy away from the discussion. And we need to learn what constitutes suicidal behaviors. So things like when a person begins to talk about too much about dying, it's a red flag. So I will just talk about some of the red flags that are or warning signs to suicide.
Okay.
So when a person begins to talk about dying themselves, you are grieving someone who has passed, and then you're also talking about dying too much, talking about the frailty of life and seeing life as non-significant. It's another red flag. If a person is feeling hopeless, helpless, and is also beginning to exhibit some certain type of behavior, maybe selling off their property, making phone calls, trying to reach out to everybody that they know, becoming excessively nice to certain types of people who they would not generally be nice to, sometimes, believe it or not, but they could become excessively averse to faith or religion, or strongly faith oriented as well. So just vacillating between extremes. And then any other attributes that is linked to the depressive phase, or when someone is going through depression, can lead to suicidal behaviors. And it's important that we need to learn how to ask the right questions when you notice a person is suicidal. and you know what to do to prevent suicide when indeed you find out that a person is suicidal.
All right, then just quickly give us some of those tips. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I said, so you mentioned now that it is important to ask the right questions, somebody who seems to be ideating suicide, and also how to prevent it. So just give us some of those practical tips.
Okay, good. So if you witness someone is suicidal, or you suspect that someone is suicidal, the first thing you want to do is to not shy away from the discussion. So you need to approach the person boldly. Have you thought about killing yourself? Contrary to popular opinion, people think that if you ask a person that if you've thought about killing yourself, it's wrong, but it's the right thing to do. The person who is suicidal doesn't want to die. They just want to end the pain of living. So when you ask the question, have you thought about killing yourself lately? Or are you tired? Is there any form of, are you feeling like there is nothing, to this life anymore? Any question that will prompt the person to explain or express how they feel will help you notice if there is suicidal tendency or suicidal ideation. And then once you discover that there's suicidal ideation, the first thing you want to do is to watch out for all the risk factors. Find out if the person has tried to, if the person has fixed a date or a time, or knows how he or she is going to do it, or if the person has attempted it before and failed, because the major precursor of an actual suicide is a previous attempt of suicide. So you might want to see that as a high risk factor. And then when you've been able to figure out all the warning signs, then you have to strengthen the protective factors. So the protective factors will be an attachment to loved ones, to those that feel like they are close to them. Faith. So because a lot of faith are anti-suicide, so a strengthening of their faith in that regard can also help. And then if a person has things or desires or things that they want to fulfill in this life, goals and ambitions, you might want to strengthen their resolve towards believing in that. And then you might want to expose the person to healthier behaviors. So like going out, engaging in recreational activities, things that will help them become active, become social again. And when you activate their behavior, they begin to recover little by little.
All right. I definitely can extract some really helpful points in managing and helping somebody who is grieving there. I hope you were also able to do that. Now, it's like we do not have any time at all this morning. The time is so short for this conversation. But however, I do have one space for a call and one message, just one call and one message. The number to dial is 014489981. Again, 014489981. If you have a question or you have a contribution, just one call. And then if you want to send your WhatsApp message, the number to send your WhatsApp message to is 0809-444-0981. We are actually streaming live on YouTube, and I will save this conversation for you when we're done so that you get to see it and maybe share it with somebody. Also, we upload it on our WhatsApp status so that you get to go back to it if you missed it. I have a message from Charles Chidozie. He says, I think one of the wrongest thing, in quote, to say to somebody who is grieving is that it is the will of God. It is better to keep your mouth shut than saying that nonsense. Do you have something to add to that, Folajaiye?
I completely agree with you. I mean, anything that will not make you say anything that is positive or reassuring, right? It's wrong. For some people, they might believe that, okay, saying that might help them. But the truth is, if it will pose a philosophical question, please avoid that statement. That's what I can say about that.
All right. Do you have some other general things you feel somebody should not say to any person who's grieving?
Wow, there are so many.
All right.
One thing I know is anything that you say that will make the person begin to question the quality of life or the importance of living is something that is unhealthy to say. So if you say things like,
at least she lived a long life, or he lived a long life.
It depends. It actually depends. The truth is, sometimes for some people, there is no right and wrong thing to say.
Yeah.
Because one thing might be right for one person and be wrong to the other. But we know that there are some right things to say. For instance, when you try to offer help to a person who is grieving and say, look, I'm really sorry about your loss. If there's anything you need at this time, please, I'm available to you. I mean, that doesn't give any form of, counterbalance on what to think and what not to think. So it helps you also not overthink the process. That's why I said the shorter, the better. The shorter you have to say to a person who is grieving, the better. Because if you prolong what you have to say, there are chances that you will say something that will be a trigger.
Yeah. In the multitude of words is the chance, the probability for nonsense. That always is a key one. And I think one thing that I'll say also is, I know how you feel. I think that line should not really be said to people. You don't exactly know how they feel. You really don't. So just don't say it. Resist the urge to shalaye in some situation. And please try as much as possible not to make a session or a visit to such a person about yourself. Do not go to share about your own, when your own mom died or your own father died. Some people, that's what we're going back to this thing. It is very, very individualized. Some people do not mind it at all. So know the person you're relating with and the things to say and not to say. Thank you so much, Folajaiye. It's been a very interesting conversation. We definitely should have this second part of this later on, talking about suicide prevention and some other things. All right, then.
Oh, yes, we should.
Yeah. Okay, so if people want to check you out on social media, how can they do that quickly?
All right. So if you don't like to check us out, please, you can check on any platform, any social media platform, Elite Life Management Consulting. The management abbreviated to MGT. So at Elite Life Management Consulting, or personally for me, if you check Abuja Psychologist online, you would find me. If you check Folajaiye Kareem, particularly on Instagram, 4 spells with the number 4 LA Kareem, you can find me as well. And definitely I'm reachable and I'm accessible and will be able to attend to your mental health needs.
Thank you, and thank you again for your time this morning. I quite appreciate it. All right. So if you missed this conversation, like I said, you can catch it on YouTube. Just search for Soul Food 981, Grief and its Complication, then the management. That's what you'll see there. It's on the playlist Breakfast in Bed 981. You get to catch up all the things that we have discussed, and also to be on our WhatsApp status. So you get to just access the link and go back to the conversation. We will be back. I will be back, and in the 8:40 time, or when it's 8:40, English, it will be time for the Curious Mind, which is our kids show. It will be very, very interesting, that I can tell you. So gather your kids around and let them ask some questions. Let them come and answer some questions. I will be the quiz mistress, and I'm very sure that there are some answers you do not have, but then what questions are we asking? What games are we playing? You have to stay tuned to find that out. This is Breakfast in Bed here on Smooth 98.1.
And you are listening to Smooth 98.1.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Jill.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thank you for coming through. All right, now catch you up later. I will send you the link. Oh, we're done.
No problem.
Bye. Bye, you fam.